So with Season 10 just around the corner and all the shiny new rosters announced, I thought it might be interesting to take a trip down memory lane to the distant time of roughly 2 years ago when all of the orgs were scrapped and the whole operation was moved in-house. It was one of the biggest roster apocalypses we've seen in a very, very long time. And what was interesting about it is that whereas for other years, the teams had been in flux pretty much throughout the entire season, and at the end of every single year, you saw a massive drop-off of players moving teams, moving regions sometimes. This time they tend to stick together. A lot of teams saw a kind of more long-term goal in mind, and it meant that after 2 years, you can get a better sense of how they did as a team. And I thought it might be interesting to run through the teams going from bottom to top, starting with the Valks because I don't have it in me to face the Scarabs just yet. But going from bottom to top and talking through how they did as a team, basically like a report card. How they did, their ups and downs, where did they get to, and is it what they wanted? And what sort of legacy do they leave moving forwards? So let me know if this is something you're actually interested in, otherwise it might end up being like a one video thing. And if you have any feedback, then I'm sorry because I'm going to end up recording all of these in probably one sitting. So if you have any feedback, keep it to yourself. No, not really, please do let me know, but you just might not see it changed at all. So I think I wanted to start with the Valhalla Valkyries, which is one of the, in terms of the brands, definitely one of the cooler brands, but in terms of the history, it's cursed. One of the most cursed brands you'll ever see. Oh, the Valkyries. Where to even start? So the Valkyries are one of the few teams that had a complete changeover to the split between Season 8 and Season 9. Not out of choice, out of a lack of qualification on one part, but we'll get to that. The Valks are... they're a tragic story. There are stories of ups and downs, and the ups were like this high, and the downs were like more downs than ups. So it started off all very exciting, as it did with all of the teams, where the big announcements came out at the beginning of Season 8, and this was pretty big because this was a team with a ton of history. So the team as originally formed was Ducky in the solo lane, Johnny in the jungle, Zeros in the mid lane, and then the duo lane, the old NRG world champion back-to-back winning duo lane of Emilito and Irafa. And this is one that really came out of nowhere for a lot of people, myself included, especially given that Irafa had just retired. I kind of thought Zeros was on his way out. Same with Emilito. I don't know whether he'd officially retired, but he definitely hadn't been playing as much. Maybe SEC stuff, but was not really in contention for SBL. And had previously said that he just wasn't willing to move. And there he was, willing to move. So you had these old heads in Zeros, Rafa, and ML with a ton of experience of winning. Not so much for Zeros at LAN, poor Team Dignitas, but you had the old heads leading the way with the two young guns and Ducky and the upcoming superstar Johnny. Everyone was super excited to see how Johnny went. People were talking about him as the new adapting. People were really excited to see what he could bring and what potential he had to really carry in the jungle. But as I said in my team review at the time, they gave me a feeling of, There is so much to like about this team, but there's also this general feeling of, that I can't really escape. I can't quite put it into words, but that's just how it makes me feel. Well said, old Dan, and that feeling turned out to be very well placed. Everyone was worried originally about the motivation of the team. Did they really have the desire and heart to grind out like the rest of the teams? And they were worried, in maybe more harsh terms, are these guys just a bit washed? Ducky's looked good at times, he's looked really bad at times. You know, Johnny's going to be this new superstar, apparently, see how well he does. But the Zeros, Emil, and Rafa core have been around for a long old time. You could tell the heart really wasn't in the game as much. So there were big old question marks about the team even before any of what went down. But you really cannot talk about this team without seeing the spectre looming over it all of our good friend, Mr. COVID, which affected some teams more than others, and for the Valks, it fucking cock-slapped them. It was absolutely brutal. The very famous tweet of Zeros putting up his 700 ping playing in the SPL, it was rough. So obviously with COVID hitting, with lockdown, closing borders, the game of pandemic brought to life, 5 people in Europe are going to have a rough time when they're having to connect to US servers, not even always East Coast US servers. So for me, for example, I actually don't mind playing on American servers that much. As long as they're East Coast, I can still get about 100 or so ping. But that's in England. Johnny was playing in Serbia. So, yeah. I mean, what are you going to do? These guys had to deal with huge ping issues from top to bottom, which just immediately put them on the back foot. Just fundamentally, it doesn't matter if you're the best team in the world or the worst team in the world, you're going to have a disadvantage coming into a game if your ping is worse. And this kind of started off the death spiral for this team. It was a team already worried about the motivation and worried about how they were going to cope, etc., etc. And now they're playing on like 300 ping every game, and they're sending their moves by post. They're sending their abilities by dial-up. Yeah, it was just a really bad situation, and it just really exacerbated the already existing concerns for this team. First split was bad, and it didn't really get much better. They didn't finish bottom of first split. The only other team that really had almost just as bad of a ping issue as they did were the only Warriors who managed to somehow finish bottom of the first split. But it was a rough split. There were some good moments from Emil particularly, and Johnny looked dangerous at times. But I mean, these guys, you could hear the dial-up connection in the background when they played. They looked lost, and it was fairly hard to watch, especially given that these are some of my favourite players, like, you know, the NRG duo lane. Really excited to see them join back together and to see them get run down by teams like the Scarabs. Yeah, it was hard to see. And this team came into the league with some drama pre-cooking anyway, because with only 8 teams in the league, it was a really, really tough battle to qualify. And there was a bit of controversy around the fact that the old team rival lot with Okeanos instead of Vote in the ADC applied to join the league and got rejected in favor of this Valks team. And a lot of people kicked off about that. And at the time, I think it's a bit of a harsh thing to kick off about, given that literally every single member of that rival team had previously retired in some form or another, apart from Ice, I think. So, but the point is the same, that they already came in with some eyes on them thinking, do they deserve to be in this league? Should they even be here? And then when the next year or so happened, yeah, those questions got a little louder. So yeah, the first split started off badly. Second split was even worse. And the third one, they had no wins at all. I think with all things being equal, with ping being exactly how it should have been, if everyone was in the studio in Atlanta, I still think they would have struggled. I still think they would have been one of the lower teams. But then you give that sort of team an absolute slap in the face by having them locked down, all scattered across Europe. It was a perfect storm of things to go wrong. And that really reflected in their results. It wasn't all bad. I mean, Johnny really was the standout. I mean, the playstyle got more and more rogue as time went on, as they started caring less and less. But you could see the potential. He had these games where he absolutely popped off and carried. In fact, he got the only pentakill in that entire year. Was it the year or was it just that split? I think it was the year.
Big man Tings chases him down, but it's Johnny, Fear No Evil, back available. Aggression is the name of the game, and that's a big one.
That's a lot!
They get rid of Big man Tings. That's a kill. That's a quadra kill for Johnny, and now Twig is all that stands between them and getting the Titan.
Give it up!
For one more kill, jump in, finds it, and gets himself the Penta, and wins the game for the Valkyrie.
But then you kind of contrast that against his other games, like his Apollo Jungle, which yeah, we don't talk about that one anymore. So yeah, 3 bad splits in a row and nothing to write home about in their tournament performances either. Good moments here and there, but generally just a really difficult time. Their last game was a qualifier for Worlds against an SEC team called Sleekness, which they lost, and that was it. 2 of the legends of the game went out with a bit of a whimper. Irafa, who was brought back in just to give it one last shot to duo lane with one of his best mates and all-time best teammates. It's a bit of a sad way for it all to end. But that was not the end of the story for the Valhalla Valkyries as a brand. So Season 8 finishes and the league starts to look for new talent. Relegations were upon us. The 2 worst performing teams of the last year, the Oni Warriors and the Valhalla Valkyries, were put into the relegation bracket. This was basically a massive play-in tournament for all the SEC teams, SOC teams, which was actually brilliant to watch. I mean, that's where this video came from. Wait. Maybe that corner, one of these corners where this video came from, which was an absolutely glorious moment. But the one team who really stood out above all the others, apart from the Oni Warriors, who, you know, they were an SPL quality team, they cleaned up and got all the way through. But the other team that really took that tournament by storm were a team called the Winner Dogs. Now, this is actually, I think, a fantastic story. This team had been together for a long old time. This was the team consisting of Aquarius in the solo lane, Kermi in the jungle, Kermi, whatever. Benny Q in the mid lane, Gamma in support, and Wowie in ADC. And these guys came through this tournament and really crushed it. They looked really, really good, really dynamic. They had a really brazen play style. They didn't seem scared of any team. Even against the Warriors, they absolutely took it to them. Don't get me wrong, the Warriors did come out with a dub eventually, but they looked good. And so although they lost in their big grand final against the Warriors, they went through the losers bracket, got to the finals against, I can't remember which team it was now, but what's more important is that they won with some really standout performances from some players, particularly Benny Q. Benny Q's raw, everyone was salivating. It was like watching Prime Wolfie. He absolutely tore it up. Huge highlight reel plays. People were really excited to see a brand new team come into the SBL and stick it to the big teams. And what I think is potentially the most impressive thing about that entire run was the fact that afterwards they revealed that they had pledged to stick together throughout the entire season to qualify for the SBL through this tournament, which is unbelievably risky. I mean, turning down SBL offers from other teams, which do not come around a lot. And typically in those teams, you see people do anything for them. They will, I was going to say stab teammates in the back, but it's not like that. They will leap at the opportunity. They will bite their hands off for a shot at the SBL, but they promise to stick together despite any offers received, just for the chance of making it through a playoff tournament. And that's unbelievably risky. Like, what if you turning down some of the best teams and then just have a bad game? You just have a bad set and your shot at SBL is gone. It's mental to me, but they stuck it out and they did it. So it's a really nice story, I think, and I was really glad to see them get their shot in the SBL. They picked up the Valhalla Valks brand, and it was time to bring honor back to one of the cooler designs of all the logos. But the Valks curse proved to be hard to shed. It was a slow start for that team, and by slow start I mean finishing bottom of the first split, and I believe bottom of the second split as well. They came bottom in both of the first two splits, and I don't know, there was a kind of feeling of, I thought you guys were going to be better than this. Which sounds like a really mean thing to say, but, you know, everyone expects them to come in a bit slow and build their way up, but they just didn't really seem to have that same pizzazz that they came in with. You saw a lot of picks in the mid lane from Benny that a lot of people called troll, some more troll than others. I am a notorious non-hater of weird picks in pretty much any role. You want to play your Atlas mid? Go wild. Terra mid? Whatever. But I mean, it's like when you learn to play chess, right? But people teach you the fundamentals of chess, what you should be doing in the most basic games, so that when you get good enough, you can learn when to break those rules and to go rogue. They started trying to break the rules without having learned them in the first place. I mean, like, if you're the Leviathans or something and you want to pick something weird like Raijin ADC, what does that matter? You're allowed to do that because you've been there, you've made it through the very top level, and you're able to kind of decide when you think it's good, when you think it's bad. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I just don't think the Valks hit that level to start experimenting like that. Maybe Atlas mid was the best pick that no one ever realized, and they were onto something, but you could never tell because you never knew if they were losing just because they weren't good enough or because they had a fucking Atlas in mid. I wanted to see them at least try just playing the meta, play the basic shit, and just see where you stack up and see where you can improve, and then go to the Wiz. I'll go wild. Pick all the Guardian mids that you want, the Najar mids, which actually turned out to be all right. Yeah, I just think they needed to get the fundamentals down first before experimenting. I mean, like, I say I'm not a hater of it, but there was a moment when I was making the video for when Haddix bought Lonos Mask on Raven and just became absolutely unkillable. The game that basically got it reverted. And I remember seeing him survive all this damage and thinking, how is he living so much? You know, where's the Valk's damage? And then you look in the player column, you're like, oh, Benny's on Terror again. That'll do it.
Benny Q spent 2 weeks playing Terror mid every other game in scrims, and it made us not scrim the Valkyries for the rest of the half of the year. If he wants to play Bad Gods, he can do, but scared of him? Yeah, scared of him wasting my time.
But these were clearly a good team, and they finally started to get together towards the end, and you can, especially towards the end of like third split, they were really getting some good wins. They were taking it to some much, much stronger teams. And I kind of got this sense of, they're obviously not going to be a team that win worlds, but they look ready to upset some teams. They reminded me of what the Scarabs were looking like towards the end of the last split, where they start to pick up a bit of momentum and could just be a bit of a wild card. But just when we were hoping they'd kick it into second gear, or a higher gear than second gear, but kick it into a different gear, they did the Valk special, which was they started to shit the bed. Oh, it was so disappointing. They had so many chances to get into really good like world's qualification spots. They had to beat. They were lined up against the Scarabs in a kind of must-win game, and this was a Scarabs team that, I mean, we'll get to in the next video, but it was a mess. That's all you need to know, is that it was a mess. It couldn't have been put on a platter for them more. And they fumbled. They fumbled and lost to the Scarabs. And then they had another chance to play the Bolts and beat them. But unfortunately for them, the Bolts just hit a really good patch of form at that time. Or maybe the Valks just weren't playing well. But they lost that as well. So both chances ripped from their hands by themselves. And then on top of that, it comes around to World Qualifiers. And they go up against a couple of SEC teams. And you think, okay, yeah, they looked poor before. But they are good enough to get through this. They are better than SEC teams. I mean, they beat a ton of SPL teams over the year. They've had so much time to grow and learn together. This is their chance. And what do you know? They fumbled it again. Lost to 2 SEC teams in a row. And it's not even one of those where it's like, oh, they looked good and just made a couple of bad calls. Like, they looked horrible. They looked awful. I don't know what happened. Kirmi, who I think was probably their best player the whole season, just, I don't know what happened to him. He's just, yeah. I don't know whether it was just him but they did not turn up. And it was, you can see that I'm struggling to get this out. What I'm trying to say is it looked like shit. It looked like big, stinky doo-doo, caca, poo-poo. It was not good. Not good. And it's a really, really disappointing end to a team that had a ton of potential. Maybe not, and they're not going to win the whole thing, but you don't need to win the whole thing to have a good Worlds. Look at the Scarabs last year. They took it to one of the top teams and looked brilliant in the process and really gave themselves some renewed belief in what they could do as a team. The Valks didn't manage that. They did the exact opposite. They went, oh. So it turns out the curse of the Valkyrie brand, it's more difficult to shake than you realize. This is really a team of what could have been. In fact, both iterations of the Valks were like that. The first iteration, maybe less of what could have been, and maybe more of what shouldn't have been. But the second coming, the second coming of the Valks, really, you do wonder if they had just buckled down at the beginning of the first split, played the really basic shit against the very best teams, seen how much they'd improved, and just, more than anything, just turned up on the day when it came to Worlds qualifiers. That tournament was blown wide open almost immediately. There were 2 SEC teams in there, man. There was so much scope for a Valks moment of glory, which never came. But they are fundamentally good players, and I expect to see many of them, not all of them, but most of them back in the SPL next year. They haven't been announced on any of the current teams, which is interesting. I really do think that they've split. And if they haven't, then I've just been bamboozled. But I think they have split. There were lots of kind of emotional posts on Twitter because these guys have been teaming together forever. I think they have split as a team, but it would not surprise me if Benny was just trolling everyone. We'll see a lot of them back. There's too much talent on that team to not see at least some of them back in the SPL. Whether we'll see the Valks brand again, I have no idea. Part of me says yes, because it's, it looks nice. People have already got a jersey, already got some kind of following behind it, but at the same time, I think personally, it's too cursed, man. I wouldn't want to pick that back up. So yeah, that was the story of the Valks. The ups, I'm not sure there were many of them, but I'm sure there were some. And the downs. In fact, all of the ups for the Valkyries came when they weren't called the Valkyries. It was when they were called the Winner Dogs. For every other team, the second you became the Valkyries, it was all downs. For the first Valks rendition, I do just wish we could have seen them on LAN and being able to take it seriously and give themselves a chance, because they really came into it without a hope. The second team, I think we've got a lot more to see from the rest of those players. So those are the Valkyries. Coming up next, it's the Scarabs.